So today we will be trying our very best to share our authentic journeys. Okay, so my journey so far, I began as a mainstream science teacher back in the 2000s. I won't tell you which year. And I grew very quickly, and I thoroughly enjoyed being in this really large mainstream school. I then grew to be head of year and was there for a period of time. I then decided to have a child and move house and do my master's all at the same time, and change to post to become an assistant head in a special needs school. So something was really exciting happening in my life at that point in time, where there was lots and lots of brilliant things that was happening. And from then, for 5 years, I have been working within the special needs sector and designing the curriculum, designing behaviour, and I then went on to become a head teacher at that particular school. And I have recently been, oh, brilliant, thank you, Nazya. Recently been working with Pathways Education, where I have been designing the post-19 provision and working with the commercial aspect of the business and having young people that are labelled as NEETs there working. So it's been a really, really brilliant journey. And throughout this whole time, I think the bit that's been most nourishing for me is the coaching and mentoring and the support that I've been able to obtain, but also to offer through our own, through BayMed and through RH. Over to you, Nazya.
Right, yeah. So our agenda today is that we're just going to be talking about change management, but it's going to be from our leadership journeys. But we will do a slight overview of change management models and ones that we enjoy using. And then we'll talk about our stories through COVID and beyond, because, you know, both of us took up headship during that period. So this is my journey here. It's nothing interesting. It's like very similar to most leaders. You start off as a teacher, and you move up, and you might move horizontally. So you may look to expand your specialisms and undertake masters or PhDs. And you may undertake lots of roles within the school that you may have. Myself did a lot of my own thinking and research around what it means to teach young people with special educational needs. And then I did a little bit of vertical development, where I did my MPQs and took on some leadership positions and developed my leadership capacity.
Brilliant, thank you, Nazya. So thinking about the title around leading change during challenging times, I think just the language around that it evokes an emotion for me anyway, and I'm sure it probably does around this table here, it evokes this sort of worry and this concern. And so when we are, and I find when we are in this place, it's always good to take a step back, and to take that step back and to sort of help rationalize and understand what the challenge looks like, and understand that really well, to then be able to find a language and a structure to be able to support that change through it. So you can see on this slide here, we have several models of change that we can use, and sometimes not one model will always work, but having a model to be able to refer to keep you and keep us not leading with complete emotion, because sometimes that is not always the best way to be. So to challenge yourself and to be able to be objective, but also appreciate the subjective part of it and why that change needs to happen. So there's a few parts of this that I think I want to delve into, but the first area is looking at Kotter's model, which is my go-to model, one that I really enjoy using. So from creating urgency right the way through to communicating the vision, and then right to the end where you embed the change. Now, when looking at certain models, I think we are really pleased when we find something that resonates. We find where we can place our change and our model, and it helps to, through that process, to decipher what you are aiming to get to. But we also, and I think is always a really good tool to do, and this is something that my coach had once said to me, is, have you explored the disadvantage of that model? Because when you explore the disadvantages of the model, you then are cognizant of what you need to make sure you are aware of, and how you need to make sure you encapsulate that and you sort of evolve that model to suit your context best. And so thinking about Kotter's model, we know that the steps are really clear, but we know there are many steps, and that could take a long time. So being really mindful around what that looks like. And also it can look quite top heavy. So I'm very aware of when it feels like that I then need to find times and solutions to co-produce and to bring the team in and to take my voice away from the model sometimes, but we still have a very clear structure and we have an agreed language and time frame that always helps. And I feel that when we have change happening, especially during a challenging time, it helps us to keep core and keep the outcome in mind when planning around that. Nazya, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like looking at all these models. Actually, I think I've used them in some shape or form, depending on the type of change that I kind of led on, or the type of change our organization undertook. So there's elements of all of these that we've kind of looked at and thought, actually, this is a really good one to use. But they're all really great. They all encapsulate. There's these core things that you do. You make sure that there's a real need for change. That's why the buy-in happens. You make sure that there's clear communication between people, and you focus on people, because the change is with the people, not to the people. And then there's the kind of appreciating the efforts that people put in to accept that change and to be a part of it and to celebrate those wins. And for me, I've really enjoyed, I actually did use Mackenzie's 7S model when I was actually setting up the school in 2021. And the reason why I like that model is because actually there's really clear categories and how they kind of all are integral to one another and actually integral to the shared values. So, and I like that interrelatedness of each of them. So that's my kind of model that I used for setting up a school. But I'm pretty sure I've used all of these models at some stage, not to the T, but used, the kind of the thinking behind, how to embed change and move forward positively.
Brilliant. Okay, so thinking about leading through challenging times, and especially within education and the school leaders, we seem to have really big, clear buckets of where the challenge may lie. So, staffing seems to be one that's a consistent thread. Another one around budgets is another huge one at this point in time. So I think just taking a step back and if colleagues can just take a moment to themselves and just have a look at each of these buckets and think to yourself, which ones feel the most challenging and why. And actually, for many of us, we might find there might be more than one, there might be more than three, there might be more than six. And that's okay. But again, having, what I like to call them as buckets. And so you can separate some of them and then it will help with prioritizing. So in my journey, so when I became head, so one of my first decisions was when I was sort of assigned this post, was at the beginning of 2021, and I had three big areas that were just my main priorities, which was the school closures and being able to manage that and trying to understand that, addressing well-being for staff and for young people, and the digital design and divide. Those were my three big ticket items that I had to work on, and within all of that, actually health and safety came in between and sort of dovetailed all the other elements as well. But when it is challenging, everything feels urgent and everything feels really pressing and really hard sometimes. And so again, a really clear visual and depersonalizing that as often as you can and taking a step back and working out what does your collective need to be able to take one step forward. And it's okay to take one step at a time, because we are wired to try and get 10 things done at a time, especially if you work in a very busy site with many, many young people and lots of deadlines and so on and so forth. So those are my big challenges. Nazya, what's your challenges, or what challenges have you faced so far?
So for me, the biggest things that are still going, and I think this is post-COVID, are the things linked to recruitment, retention, the budgets, and the catching up, COVID catch up, and the lost learning that we need to catch up on. So for me, there's like a perfect storm that's been brewing for a long time around budgets and funding and rising costs and the impact of the cost of living crisis. And there's been issues linked to pay rises coming from current budgets, and as school leaders, we've had to make really difficult decisions around where we spend money. And for me, leading that has been being really transparent about the rationale behind the decisions that we're making. And sometimes someone comes to me, I'll be like, I have to provide a really clear thinking around why I can't buy X resources or why we can't take part in X training. And I kind of have to put it back on the staff to be creative with the solutions that they come up with. And so that transparency about the rationale, I think, is really, really important during times of change. The landscape is continuously changing anyway, so this is something that I think a lot of leaders are facing across the board. Recruitment, retention, again, this is an issue, I think, across the board as well. High staff turnovers. And there's a real big impact and discussions around workload, stress versus the pay. And then, it's about finding that balance and streamlining workload in the school. And for me, what I find is when it comes to recruitment and retention, that I listen to staff and make the right decisions for the staff, because at the end of the day, they have livelihoods, that they provide for their families. So, for me, the two important things have been transparency, listening to staff, and finally, I would say the catching up has been a really, really big kind of change process that we've had to instill with the staff in terms of what we do, what is our action to make sure that all the young people that have lost learning over the last couple of years, what do we do about it? What do we do about the absence? What do we do about the mental health concerns that are rising within the school? And I think that this is across the board. So our philosophy and approach behind this has to be responsive and proactive. And a lot of schools, for example, have taken on making sure that there's mental health first aiders in school. They're accepting the funding that the DFE is offering around senior mental health leads. And I think with change, what you have to do is take the support that is being offered, accept that support. And if you are being offered any support, ask for help. And that's one of my biggest learning that I've done over the last couple of years, is that there are so many people and organizations out there and other school leaders that will help. So when you're going through change or uncertain times, or there's a fragility or volatility periods, ask for help. And there's lots out there.
I think you make a really good point then. I think actually if we just take a step back in terms of understanding challenges, so for me, it felt really acute. It was happening at that point, and there was a crisis that I had to respond to. And actually you're talking about it in a bit more of a longitudinal matter, and actually the message I think is still the same, is actually seek help. And there'll always be something or somebody that will be able to support you in that journey, be it acute or sort of long term, which is really, really interesting. Thank you. Alrighty, so just to give you a little bit more insight of my journey when I began headship. So in my first decision, actually, I was handed a section 44 by the NHT and told my first decision was that my staff shouldn't be on site, and that we need to and still have a school open on site for learners that have an EHCP, which was every learner. So it was a really tricky decision, my first day in headship. And I was trying to I quite honestly was incredibly vulnerable in regards to my own health and my loved ones, but also taking on this huge step and knowing that actually if I wasn't going to be human in my response, that I could lose and I could damage culture. And so that was really, really a tricky time, a hugely tricky time. And so what I did was I actually called with the several meetings with SRT and governors and so on and so forth, and asked who would volunteer to join. Who is it? So giving the autonomy, the agency, the choice to staff members to see who could or would feel comfortable to come in. And actually, once we had that, I then had built the culture quite quickly because it was a choice. I had offered them questions, I'd offered them space to understand where we were, but I also ensured that communication was strong and it kept coming through every day to check in with members of the team and so on and so forth. But I acutely remember thinking, I'm not the right person for this job. This isn't right. I don't know how to do this. Where's the manual? Where's the instruction guide? I had no idea. And it was really, really hard. And I had to lead with heart. And I think it was really, really enriching hearing that conversation this morning around leading with heart, because exactly that. And there's moments in crisis when you have to lead with your gut and you have to think, what's the right thing to do? And even if it creates a bit more work, or it might feel a bit more longer or harder, it's thinking, what's the right thing to do on a human and moral level? So we very quickly identified our priorities, and that was safeguarding connection and connectedness around young people and their peers and staff, and thinking about the world of, the digital world. And the school that we were in, they had just about embedded Sims. So we weren't a very digitally savvy setting. So that was a journey, a very good journey. But as a result, every learner then walked away with a Chromebook, and now that's one of their best outcomes that they're working towards. So that, there is some light at the end of it, but it was being really clear on our priorities, who could help expedite those really key skills and be able to share that, but keeping it streamlined. Again, it was so easy at times for me to be thinking about the quality teaching first, when actually I wasn't sure if every young person was having a hot meal that day. So I had to ensure that I went right back to basics and think about safeguarding, the quality of the environment for the young people, food, and that goes for staff as well, their fears around it and how they were presenting at crisis. And so therefore having to find space for myself to level out, to be rational. Some of the wins, it all sounds like doom and gloom. There were many wins. One of the wins was that actually our budgets improved significantly because we didn't have any cover and less utilities were being used. Every learner was able to access digitally, and that continues, which is really wonderful, and a huge skill in the right direction. Many learners also recognized that they could build businesses online, and so they had taken something that was absolutely brand new and taken it to 2 levels above, which is really exciting. And for me, it was building relationships. So the huge win for me as a leader during a time of challenge is building really authentic relationships. And I have been really honest around my fears around that with the team. And I think they reciprocated that and they understood that. So instead of it becoming top down, it became together. We flattened the hierarchy because we all had the same fears, but we all wanted the same outcome for us all to be safe and well. So in regards to my leadership behaviors during change and during challenge has always been communication, and that's communication outwardly, so to your teams, how often, when, how, the frequency around that, but also the communication with myself, and leading and acknowledging how I was feeling at that point in time, and being able to sit with that and understand what I need, and going back to my Kotter's model or going back to some objective models that I could use alongside a good coach helped me to feel better placed at making decisions a bit more coherently, and that's again with complete honesty in that regard. And so my big lesson, I guess, is this image here. At that time, I recall feeling really small, really stressed, really unsure. I wasn't sure if I was reassuring enough and if I was doing that well. But now stepping back and looking at how everyone's developed and the relationships that I've built and the feedback that I've got when I'm now not in that crisis, I actually see each of those bits here, which is very, very beautiful in terms of this saying here that's used in Japan, the kintsugi model, where they have a plate and it breaks, or a bowl and it breaks, and each of these bits of the journey is taped together and glued together with this gold thread. And so instead of seeing that as a difficult challenge, it's seeing the growth and being able to use that elsewhere. So I hope that's been useful. Nazya.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So my main element that I wanted to focus on was around decision making as a leader. My journey as headship started during COVID as well, in January 2021, and I was appointed to set up a school for young people at risk of need. And actually, it starts with me meeting parents. So I met some parents online, again, due to lockdown and COVID restrictions. All of this was happening online. I met parents online. And these parents desperate, absolutely desperate to get their child back into education, having recently been diagnosed with autism. This young person had had suicide ideation, had faced bullying. They were bedroom bound, they were not washing, they were not eating with the family. And the mum had left the profession to take care and make sure that their child was okay. And they were fighting for an EHCP. And around the same time, I met another set of parents whose words verbatim are, "Our child has been forgotten." And this young person had been out of education for 5 years. So they left education at the age of 7 and never returned. And the only thing that they took part in over those last 7 years was horse riding and swimming. And then I met another set of parents who relay in great detail about how they witnessed their child being dragged into the school by 2 people, and how that young person now does not trust teachers and is a school refuser. So, and there's lots and lots of data out there about how, from Children's Commissioner and Centre for Social Justice, that talks about young people who have been out of education, who are missing in education, who are being educated at home. And this includes, I think, around 100,000 severely absent or ghost children. That was the last statistic I heard. So the voice is a powerful thing, because these and many other stories like these, I was told them as a leader, and they're actually woven into the very fabric of the mission behind the setup of the school. And my mission as a head teacher, to make sure no child is left behind, and that we help them find some sense of self-agency so that they're motivated to re-engage with education. It was wrong. I mean, I look back at it now and I think that was madness, that in the middle of COVID, I was setting up a school. But at that moment in time, listening to those voices and hearing those stories, it would have been a wrong decision not to open the school. To make those young people wait, to make those families wait any longer in accessing specialist support. So the right decision at that time was, I will open the school regardless of what is happening nationally. And believe me, setting up a school is no mean feat. It takes a lot of courage. Courage I didn't think I had, actually. So I was given an empty shell, and for some people that's a nightmare. For me, I just absolutely relished that opportunity. And I set about looking at the framework, an evidence-informed framework that would underpin the work of the school. Again, recognizing the fact that the mission was to provide an education for young people who have been out of education. So those are at risk of need. So I had to undertake recruitment, again, all remotely. So not having seen these people, any of my staff in person. Again, that in itself had challenges, and I know many leaders can have their own stories around that. And then training the staff to make sure that they're prepared to meet the needs, the emotional and mental health needs of these young people. Setting up this classroom, setting up the outdoor space, beginning to create a curriculum that would work with these very specific young people. And we had to be very innovative with our approach around that. And we had policies coming out of our ears, because obviously, I mean, if anyone's ever seen the policy list of a school, it's 60 plus minimum. And creating streamlined processes. And I had to establish, I'm a brand new school. We had to establish the school within the community. We had to make the community know that we exist. And obviously, alongside that, there's that initial first looming Ofsted. And throughout this, there's a constant focus on how we were mission-led. We kept revisiting our values. We had to believe, live, and breathe those values, because our young people that would come in had to see those values in action, had to see those values being modeled in order to help them move forward in their learning. And we had to show resilience in everything that we were doing, so that the students, those young people, could also be resilient. So again, that was modeling them. And we couldn't let this fail. We couldn't allow these young people to be let down, because they had been failed so many more times. So there was a lot of resilience to make sure we see things through, and anything that we plan out, any actions we plan out, that we follow them through right to the end, just to see. A lot of the times it was a trial as well, actually, because what worked with one student wouldn't work with another. So there was an element of trial, but there was a lot of work being done to make sure we were embedding and taking on board those evidence-informed approaches. And it's sad to say, but I don't believe that there's any school leader that hasn't sacrificed something in their lives to best serve their school community. And that's a hard truth. And sometimes I look back and think about, how I could have created a better balance in my life in the first couple of years of me setting up the school. In my first year, I believe I took 5 days holiday, and I'm not proud of that, but it's a lesson I've learned now, and I will, shout to the high hilt that it's so important to whatever journey you're going through, whatever change process you're going through, you continue to create and strike that balance on that journey, and take control of the things that you can take control of, because there's so much that is out of your control, especially during times of uncertainty and change, which is beyond just the school gates, beyond just your community. It's affecting people wider than that. And actually, to be honest, that's a note for me first and foremost before it's for anyone else. But the impact is palatable. They are the smaller joys of when a young person who has spent most of their last 3-4 years sitting in their bedroom on tech walks through the school gates and comes up to me and says, "Hey Nazya, I think it'd be a really good idea for us to have a tech-free day at school." Or when a student who is scared of other students because of the bullying that they experienced, accept a small token of kindness from one of the students in the school, even though it was given through an adult. For me, I'll take that win. I'll take that. Or when the inspector walks through the door and the student says to the inspector, "I used to have a meltdown every other day and worry about school. Everyone here is friendly. It's a kind place. Learning is not that tough anymore." I will take that. When you have, and then there's the parents. When you receive an email from the parent, and this is a young person who just recently started transitioning into our setting, and they've been out of education for 2 years. And they sent an email, and this is the email: "Thanks so much for making my child feel so welcome at school. He has absolutely loved his first 2 weeks at Pathways. To encourage you all, here's some feedback on how my child has found his first 2 weeks at school. He has been so positive about school each time we've picked him up. He is so happy and calm at home and looks forward to school each day. He has even been singing a song about how much he loves school. He seems to have already built positive relationship with staff and other kids, and does not have a bad word to say about school. He probably finds Tuesday mornings the hardest, as he's keen to come into school, and finds waiting until 1 p.m. harder than the earlier starts on Monday and Thursday." That's the impact. And all of this, including the issues and concerns that may come through, gives me the feedback that I need to be able to make informed decisions. And it also impacts on my resilience, my risk taking, and my capacity to lead, because at the end of the day, we are human beings. And when you feel down about certain things, you will, sometimes the decisions you may feel like you just don't have the capacity or capability to make the right decisions. But when you see impact, that makes decision making easier, and it gives you courage behind the decisions that you make. So our final thoughts, there we go. Our final thoughts of this presentation. I'm just going to pull together everything that Krupa has said and my own words, is that, when you're leading a school through challenge, it's a responsibility that extends far beyond just day-to-day operations or academic achievement. It's about fostering an environment where every voice of that community is heard and valued. And in times of challenge and change, it's so important that we harness that. We harness the voices of our colleagues, our parents, our teachers, the students, the governors, because they become valuable sources of wisdom, resilience, and innovation for us. When students feel that they have a voice, they become more engaged in their learning, they take ownership of that journey. When parents feel their voice is being heard, they become like powerful advocates for their children's education. And it creates a real positive partnership between home and school. When teachers are given a platform, their expertise is harnessed and they're motivated to go above and beyond for the students. And we see this time and time again. When the whole community comes together and when they have a voice, it becomes a driving force for community success. And it kind of reinvigorates that sense of purpose in what we do. And this cycle needs to be regularly revisited and embedded in the way we work as leaders. Listen, adapt, lead with purpose. We continue that process, continue it all the time. And the challenges we face in education, they're complex, they're always evolving. And whether it's technology, whether it's the economics, whether it's politics, we can't navigate these waters alone as school leaders by themselves. It is only through the collaboration and through and that informed kind of decision-making process can we just tap into the collective, that collaboration. And that will allow us to lead with purpose, that will allow us to adapt, and that will allow us to innovate. Our decisions that we make as leaders have to come from a place of personal power, not fear. So when we listen, we create a culture of trust, we create a culture that is based on respect and inclusivity. And when we just look at the person, and we send a powerful message to everyone, where we send them a message that we are invested in growth and progress, and their voices, experiences, and perspectives are integral to that. And we empower them to then, we empower people to then believe in their capabilities and then contribute to that community, to the progress, to the growth, and to a better future.